Hope you are on mute. Welcome everybody to the IRWA Chapter 4 Project of the Year presentation meeting. I'll turn it over to Diana.
Okay, I have to say that I just lost my email here, so just bear with me for a moment. Just got to get to my program chair. Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank Scott for submitting a project for Project of the Year. I'm actually kind of excited to hear about this project. I've heard a lot about Coffee Creek, so I'm interested in hearing about your project and the efforts that LaBonde put forth on this project. So go ahead, Scott. Introduce your team, and I don't know if you're the only one presenting or if you've got others on your team that are going to present as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Diana, and thank you, Jesse, for hosting Project of the Year this year and virtually this time. It's good to see your faces over the internet waves. So why don't I share my screen? I should introduce the members of the team that are in the meeting today. Mark Anderson with LaBonde was the senior agent who conducted most of the negotiations, private property owners. I did conduct some of the negotiations myself, and Heather LaCrone with LaBonde was the junior agent on the project and was also in charge of the document preparation. David Connor looks like he is not on in the meeting right now, but he was the relocation agent on this project. So that's our team, and why don't I share my screen and get started. Let's see here. Okay, if I've done that correctly, you should be able to see the first slide. So it was the US 101 Coffee Creek Remove Fish Barrier Project. The owner is WashDOT, and Parsons Scarcella JV, the joint venture, was the design builder, with LaBonde Land being the right-of-way consultant on the project. Just working through how to change slides. Here we go. Okay, so the driver of the project was this problem, a fish barrier in the form of a Highway 1, sometimes referred to as US 101, Highway 101, in Shelton, Washington. And this barrier prevented salmon from accessing about 13 miles of spawning habitat upstream from this location. So it really was a significant barrier to those species, and was so that was the driver for the project. And before I get into sort of right-of-way acquisition and interesting property issues that we confronted, I'd like to talk just a little bit about the procurement process that we went through to get this project. So before we were even, charging our time and working actively on the project, we had to go through the bidding process. A bit unique in that we essentially had to conduct a full project funding estimate and include it with the bid. And that project funding estimate included all the right-of-way costs. So not just our fees as a consultant team and our services, but that was costs for the land rights that would be acquired, and even given the risk of condemnation. So what were those costs? And it's not even like really having a full grasp on what the project was going to need. It was a very challenging prospect. And so we really did build in some contingencies and were conservative in our estimates of fair market value. So it was a little bit odd to have like just compensation be part of our bid from the onset before you even know what the project is going to be, but that's what WashDOT requested, and it was part of the design build process. Subsequently, we did learn that we would have been eligible for reimbursement of some of our initial costs to prepare our bid, but we ultimately did not take them up on that, and I regretted it because it ended up being a lot of work on the onset just to develop our bid for this project. Okay, so while we're on this slide, yes, Parsons Scarcella joint venture was awarded the project. Unique design in dealing with the creek, and also because of its lower impact. So ultimately, the design that won out was to divert flows from Coffee Creek around the culvert. And rather than digging up 101 essentially and replacing the culvert, disrupting all that traffic, involved diverting the creek, and I'll get to that here on the next slide. So this shows an overview of the project area. And let me see, I guess I should turn on my laser pointer so you can see what I'm talking about. One.
Just to let you know, your internet is like going in and out a little bit. So we're missing a few things every once in a while, but we're still on board with what you're saying. Just letting you know.
I'm sorry to hear that, you guys. Well, I'll do my best, and let me know if I cut out big time. All right, so hopefully this tracks. So here's Highway 101, and the existing Coffee Creek flowed underneath it through a series of culverts, as I mentioned, through here, and to its confluence with Goldsboro Creek here. Well, the plan involved diverting flows along 101 through a box culvert underneath Shelton Matlock Road to a new confluence with Goldsboro Creek here upstream. So while we have this overview, it's probably a good time to note that given that we're moving flows upstream, now Goldsboro's carrying a greater volume of water in this section of stream right here. It's a little bit higher volume of water, which had an effect ultimately on this bridge here, but we'll get to that later in the presentation. Okay, just zooming out for the project vicinity. If you don't know where Shelton is, it is located about 20 miles north of Olympia on Highway 101 in Mason County. And as a result of the project design, we had some right-of-way acquisition that was needed and a relocation. At the end of the day, we ended up acquiring one full acquisition for the relocation of a park and ride owned by Mason County. And that full acquisition needed a PPO relo. We had 3 TCEs for the new creek bed. We had 7 TCEs to restore the old creek bed. And that was an interesting topic, which I'll get to more later on in the presentation as well, in terms of that restoration of the old creek bed. Then we had 1 additional TCE to reinforce the bridge abutment that I mentioned a minute ago. Okay, this might be a little hard to see, but this map does go into more detail in terms of the project and the property impacts. So my laser pointer is showing this is Highway 101, and the old Coffee Creek passed underneath 101 here. This is the old channel here, and so this shows this is where 7 different TCEs were needed for restoration of the old creek bed. Then you have the new creek, which was passing mostly, almost entirely within WSDOT right of way. So there were really no rights needed to acquire that, but there were rights needed, 3 TCEs up in this vicinity at the new confluence for restoration to make sure that environmentally all of those surfaces matched and stuff like that. I guess the last TCE that was needed was up in this location for the bridge abutment work. All right, so we did go through an appraisal process. We're under scope to do that, and so we brought on board Integra Realty Resources of Seattle, and they did the project funding estimate, administrative offer summaries, and all of the TCEs turned out to be of such low value that we could, get with. It was under that $25,000 threshold set by WSDOT for AOSs. In fact, many of the TCEs were of such low value that we set a minimum payment policy of, I think it was $300 or maybe it was $500. I can't remember which, but they work mostly being in water or in and around stream buffers. WSDOT itself conducted the appraisal reviews, so there was no need for us to bring on board a separate third-party review appraiser. Okay, as I mentioned, most of the earthwork location was done within existing WSDOT rights of way. So because of all of that heavy work that needed to be done, WSDOT did issue a Cert 3 for construction to move forward in all of those areas that were already owned by WSDOT. So here you can see they've already done the vast majority of excavation. It looks like they're just wrapping up sort of habitat recreation. They're putting, stumps and logs and stuff in place, getting ready to finalize that creek bed. Cross section here shows, and I think it depicts fairly well how much earth really needed to be moved. So this dotted line shows the old grade of the earth, and here's the sort of new profile of the earth. So they had to excavate all that material. Here's just a shot in real life showing the excavated new creek bed with Highway 101 up here above on the right with an off-ramp to Shelton Matlock Road. And over here on the left is the car dealership that we needed to acquire a TCE from. Okay, as we proceeded with offer package development, we had the opportunity to do something you don't always get to do, except on some WSDOT projects or those projects involving station offset legal. So props to Heather on our team for putting those legal descriptions together with great accuracy. It was kind of a lot of fun, and just the technical.
Super fun. I really loved it.
Great. We did a great job and got accolades, I guess, from WSDOT for the accuracy because, well, let's see. If you're not familiar with the station offset legal description, I'll just kind of discuss very briefly how that works. And this is just a screenshot from the right-of-way plan. And what I did cut off sort of inadvertently is the center line of US 101, which is shown off screen to the top here. And many of you recognize the WSDOT's limited access boundary, which is here, that sort of diagonal across hat there. But the basis of your station offset description is going to be the center line of that 101 right of way. And this here is our TCE. This is essentially the old creek bed. And you're essentially describing a polygon using a point-to-point description. And each one of these points is connected by a line, obviously. So you're talking about, well, I can't see the writing there and be able to either, but basically you're just describing, 300 feet east of the center line, easterly of station, 0.56 or whatever. So it's just a very detailed approach to developing our own descriptions, and it was a lot of fun. The other thing I can point out about this particular plan sheet that we discovered in our offer pack that separated two private properties. Initially on the plan sheet, all the way up to the right of way, or it might have been the edge of the creek. Well, as we were reviewing the descriptions for this parent parcel, I discovered that the description actually just took it to the center of the creek, not the creek boundary. So it didn't seem like that big of a deal, but we disclosed it in our findings, and the team decided that, or WSDOT determined that it was best that the right-of-way plan be revised. It did result in a little bit of a delay and a revision to our AOSs, but at the end of the day, it ensured that the property owners were compensated fairly, because a little bit of area on one side of the boundary versus. So here's just a snapshot of a station offset legal description that we developed. Lots of bearings and distances and stations. Okay, getting going with title review and all of the ownership types that we encountered on this project. It was really diverse and just a lot of fun. So first we had two publicly owned parcels, one by Mason County and one by the city of Shelton. We had numerous corporations in the form of a car dealership, a log scaling company, timber company, and an investment company. We had a living trust in which the individual was no longer living. We had several individuals. And one thing I'll point out just in terms of ownership of parcels, it was just, there was a lot of documentation in terms of authority, as you guys will well know about, having corporate resolutions, operating agreements, minutes to meetings, etc. So there was a lot of that title documentation. And also when we got into negotiations with the public entities, these were sort of scrap surplus properties that they really didn't want to carry on their books. So when we went asking for them or asking of them a TCE, they said, well, no, why don't you just buy our whole property? And so we had to really push back on that and explain that WSDOT only acquires property it needs for its public project. And so that was, I think, kind of a common refrain as I've moved forward and dealt with other public agencies on other projects. That is a common refrain for some scrap excess properties. They don't want to grant an easement. They'll just want to sell you the whole property. Okay, moving on. This is a snapshot of the full acquisition that we did. And this is the property that was used as a log scaling company. So what that is I had to educate myself through this process of what is log scaling. They would drive their logging trucks into these bays here and an measure the logs and do a calculation of the board footage that the trucks were carrying to establish value. So that's what this property was all about. It had been underutilized for several years. So was in some ways just kind of a scrap yard. There were some trailers and things just sitting there. So definitely underutilized, and it was appraised as vacant land. Okay, here's a slide showing this is the main river called Goldsboro Creek that Coffee Creek runs into. And we needed to acquire a TCE across this portion of private property in order to access the bridge abutment below the bridge here. And the reason for this was because past flooding had damaged the bridge. And so it frankly needed repairs. But also, and maybe more significantly, the diversion of Coffee Creek flows above here or upstream here would cause an increase in storm volume to this creek, and pose the added risk of further damage to the bridge. So the project really needed to bolster or improve that footing. Another thing to note about this slide is this property owner was well aware of the fact that increased added above his property, and he was concerned about the risk of future erosion on his property. So the project looked at that, and they had a hydraulics engineer that ran various models, and they came back about 50-50 as to whether there would actually be erosion to this property or deposits of sedimentary material that could actually increase the area of his property. So it was it was highly speculative as to what type of damage, if any, would occur to this property by our project. And so through working with the owner's attorney, they agreed to accept the state's offer and essentially just monitor it over time. And if anything happens, then go from there. But as you can see, it is a wet area. It's already very low to the creek, and the developable portion of this property is much higher, much further upland. Okay, moving on to the lower Fish Creek, or the old existing creek. This picture shows one of the 7 properties that we needed access to for the restoration. And what does that mean, restoration? Okay, well, this slide shows a profile of the elevation of the creek bed, and it's not consistent. As you know, it's not like a water slide, right? This is a natural stream, and there's pools and eddies and turns and stuff like that. So when the flows are reduced, you might actually have areas of standing water, which would be a problem. And so through the Department of Fish and Wildlife and tribes required that the remaining flows in this little creek needed to continue moving. That just means that the project needed to go in and carve off, and my laser pointer is kind of showing some of these high areas, that they would go and regrade and make it a suitable stream for a smaller size of water. Okay, so I mentioned we did have a relocation on our hands with the full acquisition. And so the first thing we really had to look at in the relocation was, is this a business? And through our interviews with the property owner, it turns out they weren't able to establish that the facility contributed materially to their operation or to their larger umbrella business. So it was determined to be a personal property only relocation, as these improvements weren't included in the appraisal either. These are all movable structures. And not only did it not contribute materially, it's not like they were taking a loss, it was that they hadn't been operating there for more than 2 years. So more about the entitlements that they received were direct moving expenses, and then the cost to disconnect and reconnect power to those sheds that you were seeing there. They did have a replacement site already in mind that was owned by the corporation, so there was no lengthy site search involved for them to move their personal property. It was quite straightforward. And now, for all you relocation gurus out there, pop relocation quiz, Diana. No. Is a relocation plan required even when it's just a simple PPO? Yes, a relocation plan is required, regardless of how simple your relocation problem might be. It was interesting because on this project, we did receive initially the word that we would not need to create a plan, and being a little superstitious about things, we inquired and then we did get confirmation, yes, that we do need a plan. Okay, so what were the results? We concluded all negotiations and the relocation in lieu of condemnation and without appeal. The project received certification 1 on June 23rd of 2020, just in time to meet the fish window that is set for this particular stream, which began in July. So we were really moving pretty quick there towards the end to wrap up negotiations with the final parcel. I'm very grateful everything worked out, and great job to the acquisition team to get it all done to allow the project to move forward. Few current photos. This is the box culvert showing flows through the diversion, the Coffee Creek diversion, where there were none previously. So that box culvert obviously is large enough and to support a natural stream and the migrating fish. Here's another shot of the completed creek diversion with the car dealership on the left and 101 on the right. And here's a picture of the old fish blocking culvert. And as you can see, there are still some flows in it. So we didn't actually reroute the creek entirely. We diverted the majority of the flows, or the state diverted the majority of the flows, and that old branch remains. So I guess old is kind of a fallacy of a term to use. The original Coffee Creek is still there, and we just added a new branch to it. And from what I understand, I don't know if there's a name yet for that branch, but you sort of have upper and lower Coffee Creeks. So this photo shows that the culverts do still move a small amount of water, and then additional water comes from this wetland up here. Here's another shot, a recent photo this winter, this week, as a matter of fact, of the existing flows in the old Coffee Creek. And it clearly shows that it has not yet been restored. In this particular bend, there is still some flows moving. I don't know if this section is slated for restoration, but there will be some pools that will have to be regraded ultimately, but that work has yet to commence. Okay, so for our project of the year, just an overall summary from the procurement process before we even had this job, all the way through the acquisition and relocation process. It was really unique and just a lot of fun to work on. I think the rest of the team would agree with me. And we had a lot of interesting property problems that we encountered, and just all of the issues associated with property boundaries in riparian zones and the interface with creeks and water. Then there were the stream dynamics as well, and just conveying to property owners how water works and moves and impacts property. And then we got to develop our legal descriptions too. So congratulations to everyone. And it just feels really good to be part of a project that helped improve our environment and allow migrating steelhead and salmon to access 13 miles of spawning habitat. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Exactly.
Scott, I have a question about the old creek. How much water is flowing in the old creek as opposed to the new, or how will that affect the wildlife? Will they utilize both creeks or something?
That's a really good question. And there's, I wish I could probably speak more intelligently to the specifics on the environmental impact.
Yeah.
We did get some numbers, and maybe that's part of the presentation I could have gone into a little bit more, but we did have some figures in terms of the number of population of fish that have been counted in the area. It's relatively small, but significant nevertheless, considering it's an endangered species. Salmon and steelhead are endangered. So
Yeah.
several major species of salmon would migrate all the way up to that blockage. And it was in the 3 digits figure, a couple
Oh,
hundred
sure.
fish per year.
Yeah.
And so, and also what I don't have for you is volumes of water that were diverted. But as you can see, the majority of it, something like 80% of the flows are diverted, maybe more. So the main channel has been relocated, and that's where the migratory fish will have access through. Meanwhile, the old stream will continue to support, maybe there will be some fish that do go up there as far as they can.
I see. Okay. So the whole thing of the project was, well, we're obviously trying to make it easier for the fish to migrate. So it made sense to divert the culvert for that reason, or I guess. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And instead, one thing that perhaps I did not mention at the onset is that the state is under a federal mandate to remove fish barriers throughout the state. And that federal mandate requires do this. They have to spend, and they do spend a lot of money in removing culverts throughout this, publicly owned, state-owned culverts throughout the state. And this is just one of them. There are many.
Okay. So it's an ongoing thing that the state's doing now, and yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Great project. Yeah.
So Scott, I have a question. What would you consider your most challenging acquisition on the project? Was it from a private property owner, a tribe, another governmental agency?
I think that the most challenging one was from a gentleman who owned a corporation. So it was an Inc. It was a Washington corporation, but it really was just a single member corporation. So he's just a guy, right? But the nature of his concerns were it was the gentleman whose property was near the bridge, and was he was speculating as to will the increased flows cause erosion to his property. And that was a really tricky technical discussion to enter into, because we didn't know and still don't know to this day. It's like time will tell. But unfortunately, we couldn't include it in our appraisal problem because it was so speculative. There were studies that said we're going to add to your property, and there's studies that say we're going to take away. So that was a really tricky thing to confront and sort of address the concerns. And luckily he had an attorney that was apparently quite easy to work with, and so we were able to move forward. Mark, is there anything that you wanted to contribute there in terms of troublesome negotiations?
No, I think he's muted.
Yeah.
We can't hear you.
Okay, well, and that's okay. If you want to chime in, that's fine. But yeah, that's the most significant one I can remember.
Okay, thanks for sharing.
I will say that since Mark can't say anything, I guess, because we can't hear him, he did a really amazing job of prepping because there were so many technical title issues behind the scenes, and he was really great at making sure we had everything ready to go, so that when Scott and I went to a few meetings, it was like people were signing right there on the spot the day we were making our offers, because of Mark's efforts before even making the offer, of just having everything ready to go. It was impressive hearing some of his conversations because our cubicles are next to each other, and just learning a lot from Mark as the senior right-of-way agent on the project. It was a good learning experience for me. His tips and tricks.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, Scott, Heather, and Mark. LaBonde, sounds like not only was it an interesting project, but it was really well executed. Thank you very much for sharing it with us. That was a treat. And I'm going to go ahead and say, this was blowout. There was almost no contest. I'm going to go ahead and award you, LaBonde, the title of 2021 Project of the Year. Congratulations.
Congrats.
Thank you so
We'll
much.
have a nice award for you.
Great, thank you.
You'll have something coming your way. You'll have that $100 coveted gift card headed your way. We'll be in touch about that.
Great, it's going into the party fund.
That's right.
More tequila.
Now we're talking. All right, guys.
Awesome.
Well, that basically wraps up our meeting today. I've got a couple of announcements if you guys want to just bear with me about our next couple of months. April is usually our meeting at the Tulalip. Unfortunately, we were forced to cancel that meeting due to COVID and the various CDC guidelines and meeting restrictions. So I apologize for any disappointment that might have caused, but we will go ahead and meet virtually as we have been. And we look forward to meeting you all in April again. You will see information posted on the website as well as sent out in an email blast. One more important thing, next month we are also announcing our slate of officers. So if anybody is interested in serving on the board in either one of the executive board positions or as a committee member, please feel free to email me and throw your name in the hat. We'll have a great election if there's a contested one, or we'll just move on as we have in the past, just moving up the ladder. Each board member will move up to their next position or whatever. If anybody is interested, please let me know. We welcome any and all volunteers. It's interesting times right now, so we're all being as flexible as we can, and we're always mindful of each other's time. One more point is we've got other Employer of the Year, or excuse me, just Employer of the Year awards coming up, and also Professional of the Year. The deadline to submit these applications is the end of April. So if you have someone in mind for either Employer of the Year or Professional of the Year, please consider submitting a nomination. And last but not least, the IRWA Region 7 Forum is being held in Vancouver, Washington. That is coming up on Friday, April 9th. So that'll be approaching quickly. Everyone will have the opportunity to attend virtually. And there is also a 25-person maximum for in-person attendance, if anyone's interested in that. So without any further ado, does anybody have any questions? Happy to answer them. Otherwise, I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting. I appreciate everybody for coming out and joining us for Project of the Year. Thank you again, Scott, Heather, and Mark.
Thanks. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.